Welcome to RISE. From Lausanne, Switzerland, I am Professor Demian Hodari of EHL Lausanne, teaching from home, but still teaching.
And from lovely lockdown London, it's Anita Mendiratta, thrilled to be alongside Professor, the esteemed Professor, the established Professor, the exceptional, grouchy Professor, Demian Hodari, joining us from EHL and along with a very special set of guests on Rise in Practice.
Today's episode, as you can see, it's called Much to Learn You Still Have. And obviously Star Wars fans will know the Yoda reference there. And I don't say that just because Nick Meyer called me the Yoda of hospitality strategy. Thank you, Nick. Went right to my head, had to bring that up. We've got 5 professors, 5 colleagues of mine from EHL who have each really spent some time thinking carefully about the impact of COVID-19 on our industry and specifically on the disciplines that they are experts at in terms of their research and teaching. So we're going to hear from them about what they would do differently now going forward because of this virus and the pandemic that it's created.
Why is this program so special? Because Rise in Practice is a direct response to what all our viewers are saying is very important to them. We've covered entrepreneurship, startups. Last week, we talked about my profession, which is consulting, which was very cool. This week, we're going to be talking about the academic world and how, as many of our viewers have asked, is curriculum going to be changing during and post COVID-19? So, Demian, over to you and your fantastic colleagues for sharing their perspective from EHL.
All right, let's see what they have to say.
So basically, COVID-19 has changed many things. And I think the way how we see tourism is also changing at the moment, because of course, tourism was a very fast growing industry. And we were talking a lot about mass tourism, over tourism. Even we were talking about subjects such as neo-colonization, because of course all these past dynamics since the 1950s, they shaped a type of tourism what I think was not very sustainable. So I think the topics what we will probably neglect or at least not develop that much in the future, maybe we'll use it for examples, just to compare it with the future situation, is one of them which comes to my mind is the over-tourism. Obviously, the over-tourism when we speak about destinations such as Venice, Angkor Wat, or some other destination in the world, the Galapagos Islands, will probably disappear for a few years. And may I say that hopefully forever, because I think this is something absolutely not sustainable. So I think this is something what we should reconsider.
So hospitality companies, by and large, have traditionally defined their businesses as selling nights and services. So strategies have classically evolved around 2 worldviews, devising their competitive advantage around market positioning and resource endowment. It is not surprising that hospitality strategy courses have largely adopted a firm-specific view. Yet, with the burgeoning digitalization of large swath of society, global supply chains, and an increased integration of non-traditional market players into the hospitality industry, we see this firm-specific view increasingly losing its relevance. In fact, the COVID-19 pandemic has very painfully pointed out how interconnected the hospitality industry is by now within its boundaries and also beyond its industry boundaries. Whether it's, for instance, Accor, that has adopted its augmented hospitality worldview, integrating traditional and non-traditional players, or Ambetta, Marriott's Travel Innovation Lab, where they co-create innovations with their customers. We do see much more of a so-called integrated ecosystem perspective taking up relevance in how we're devising strategies. So consequently, my suggestion is that we are lessening our view on the firm specific view and switch over to a more ecosystem perspective when teaching about how hospitality players in the future are going to be devising strategies.
I think when it comes to the small and medium businesses, we know very little about their business models and in particular about what drives innovation in their business models. So something that should be emphasized for the future should be to understand what are the drivers of creating value and capturing value. In other words, what are the drivers of the business model for a small firm? And in particular, how can we change that in the future, even if there are, like crises or contingencies happening in the business environment? So something I think about is probably introducing more elements that help us understand the dynamics of the business models for small restaurants, for small hotels, for breweries, for small wineries, that they not only need to understand that to succeed today, but also to react to changes like COVID in the future.
I believe we should maybe split this up into back of house and front of house employees. I would say for back of house employees who might be increasingly forced to work in a non-traditional setting, in the home office, separated from their teams, I think we definitely have to put more emphasis on the topic of virtual teams. What makes virtual teams successful? Which types of behaviors can be catastrophic in virtual teams? There's a leadership component to that as well. How do you lead successfully in virtual teams? How do you keep employees that are not sitting in the same office with you energized and motivated? How do you make sure that they're doing what they're supposed to do rather than spending the entire day on Netflix? So those are challenging issues that we will have to address. And basically, I would say, whereas in the past, we looked at the overall topic of teamwork, for instance, and then we treated virtual teams as a little side topic, this order of importance is probably going to be completely reversed in the future. If we look at front of house employees, I'm assuming that the interaction with customers, with guests, is even going to become more difficult in the current COVID circumstances. And here I'm thinking of topics like, for instance, emotional labor, which we have traditionally always covered in the No-BHR class, but which will deserve more emphasis. So how can you manage your own emotions? How can you try to have an impact on the emotions of guests who might be not used to the new constraints due to COVID, who might be unwilling to comply with regulations, who might get angry, aggressive, and who knows else what. So that is a topic that has traditionally been treated rather superficially, and I think it will definitely deserve more attention in the future.
Yeah, so I am going to answer that question in the context of another change that we might expect to see in consumers, which is their attitude towards and preference for technology. Now, in the past, many had shown some reluctance in adopting technology, partly because of the high costs, but mostly because of the lukewarm reception from consumers. Now, consumers did demand a personal touch, especially for hospitality services. But there is evidence to suggest that that preference might have changed. At the New York Institute of Technology, I'm collaborating with the Chinese University of Hong Kong to explore how people perceive the use of service technologies in high context services, such as restaurants and hotels. Now, our initial findings show that after a prolonged period of physical distancing, the presence of others would likely trigger thoughts of disease transmission. And because of that, people perceive a higher risk of virus transmission with human employees due to the interpersonal interactions. Ironically, service robots, which are associated with functionality that lacks social warmth, they actually reduce perceived interpersonal interactions and therefore lower perceived risk of viral infection. So what we found in this initial study is that during the pandemic, the use of service robots in high context services seems to be effective in increasing visit intention. I think that many hotels and restaurants already see contactless technology, such as mobile check-in and payment, as necessary standards post-pandemic. I think that using AI and robotics to further reduce interpersonal contacts will likely be the next frontier to explore in order to rebuild confidence and encourage consumers to travel and consume again. Now here, the challenge for marketer and for hospitality brands is how to meaningfully fuse technology like AI and robotics into a brand's identity. So beyond just using them in operational procedures that are typically undifferentiated across properties and brands. And more importantly, getting employees' input as to how these technologies can improve their work experience and performance is also an important topic for our industry going forward.
The new topics, I think, which were already mentioned in previous, or maybe were taught in previous academic curriculums or in different universities. Of course, we speak about sustainable marketing, but the sustainable marketing has different segments. Sustainable marketing, we speak about product development, or we speak about market development. But what I feel and strongly feel, just maybe giving an example about one of the destinations which is very close to my heart, is the Galapagos Islands. And they realized that the destination was absolutely unsustainable, even though we all believe that it's a sustainable destination. We speak of the environmental impact. But now we have some social, culture, and even economic revelations where we see that it was not a sustainable destination. Now, the hope, and I have a colleague I'm working with at the moment, the hope is that the future will bring a more conscious and more established tourism planning, strategy building for example, the Galapagos Islands and most of the destinations, because I think the whole planification has to be based on sustainable values. Until now, mainly economic motivations and economic reasons were behind the whole tourism planning in those destinations, and more environmental considerations. The culture and social elements, of course, were not very often respected. But I hope that if the tourism decision makers will be more and more sustainable in the future, I think we can build sustainable destinations. And I think we have to teach students how to go to this path to become more sustainable in the planning, and not only making it as a kind of greenwashing in the future. So I think a very solid and very good foundation for each destination from a sustainable perspective will be necessary from these two perspectives, the market development strategy and the product development strategy, which means that we are not only creating or encouraging tourists behave more sustainably in the destination, but also we are offering them sustainable destinations in the future.
The travel and tourism industry has been characterized as a growth case for decades. To exemplify this, just take the numbers of 2019, where the industry has grown by 3.5%, by and large outperforming global economic growth. So it doesn't come as a surprise that most curricula focused on the development and implementation of strategies that tap into evolving opportunities. This comes at a price where these very same curricula have rarely ever focused on responses to internal as well as external shocks to an organization. The pandemic has dramatically pointed out that we do lack teaching in what we call strategic change, and in the worst case scenario, complete turnarounds. So I see this as a wake-up call to even move beyond just the pandemic right now, but looking at a broader perspective of how important strategic change and turnarounds are. Because even irrespective of the pandemic right now, every product, service, and business model has a shelf life because contexts change. Consequently, I do see us in the responsibility to start conveying a skill set that equips future leaders to address these challenges, particularly also in light of knowing the statistics that 3 out of 4 strategic changes do in fact fail. So looking at the domain of strategic change and turnarounds is not just a debate around devising a sustainable competitive advantage. It potentially may make the difference between the death or the survival of a hospitality player altogether.
So I think I already kind of started that, which is the interaction or the human technology interaction. I really believe that going forward, this is kind of the area that most hospitality brands must explore. So one of the things is, in the past, I think that we see technology mostly as a sort of a replacement for labor. But because of this pandemic, I think that, we saw that in many cases, technology actually sort of serve as an intermediary remedy for times when, human employees actually cannot go to work, or maybe it's not safe for them. So I think in the future, definitely see that human technology interaction as well as their integration would be an important area.
I think I would stick to what I think is one of the most important elements for sustainable destinations is this cultural element. So I would probably emphasize even more on this host and guest relationship, because in order to create a harmony and a sustainable destination where people feel comfortable with the tourism industry, I would definitely develop more and start from the beginning. Let's say if I had the chance to start tourism planning in the world since the 1950s, and when we only had 25 million international tourist arrivals, and in 2018 we had 1.4 billion international tourists in the world, I think I would emphasize more with my studies, and of course I would try to pass it to my colleagues and my students in the future, how to build a more harmonious relationship between hosts and guests in those destinations, and not a dominating one, and not a kind of colonial relationship between the host and the guest.
It's gonna sound like a repetition a little bit, but if I have to go and study one new particular topic, it would have been business model innovation for small businesses. Why am I saying that? So we've seen a lot of restaurants, a lot of bars, clubs that actually were closed for here in Switzerland for 2 months, in other countries for more than 2 months. And nobody knew how to help them out, because the most important source of revenue for them was actually selling their products, food, accommodations, beer to the customers, and they couldn't do that. And given that, I realized that not even the owners or even the managers understood how they could very quickly react to that. And it's not about crisis management, because it was not about managing the crisis. It was about being innovative when the resources were not there. So I think if I were to study something, if I go back in time and I had to choose one topic that would have been important to help a little bit more during COVID times, it would have been business model innovation for small and medium enterprises. There is very little literature in that topic. There is a little bit of evidence when it comes to certain wineries, small and medium companies in a few countries, but we don't have systematic evidence on that. So that's probably the one topic I would have liked to know more in order to even help businesses react differently during the COVID crisis.
Wow. One new aspect. I'm probably going to cheat a little bit on this one, because I don't think that it would be completely new to me, but I do believe it is completely new to the hospitality industry, and most industries, actually, to be quite honest. I do have a diehard passion for cognitive and social psychology. I do believe, so surprisingly, in the social sciences, we're oftentimes still not putting enough emphasis on the individual, the human being in doing business. And topics like resilience, also changed working conditions, I think point us more and more, even beyond my general, let's say, case that I built, towards the necessity to understand how entrepreneurial and innovative mindsets are much about understanding how human beings make decisions. And that's where I'm departing from, let's say, traditional economics, where we believe there's the homo economicus, and focusing more and integrating more our understanding of behavioral economics into the hospitality teaching. Because we are boundedly rational. We are highly emotional in the decisions we make. We're satisficing depending on the conditions we're facing. And while we have that long-standing knowledge for quite a few decades at this point, and I mean, most of the Nobel Prize laureates in the last decades have been from this field of study, we are by and large not integrating that knowledge even remotely sufficiently into our teaching when it comes to the hospitality industry. And I do believe, considering how central the human resource is to our business, that is where we can make a real delta in terms of performance. And that's something that I would be liking to know more already, but certainly would like to focus on more going forward.
Well, not an easy question. I would say, given that we spend a large amount of our work time in education environments, interacting with students, trying to impart knowledge, I think one of the things that I would really be curious about is to see how the education landscape is going to change as a result of COVID. I think for many, many years, we assumed that bringing people physically together in a classroom and talking to them ex cathedra was sort of the optimal way of dealing with things. And we now see actually that, distance education can even have potential benefits. It increases flexibility. Students can maybe re-watch recordings of your course afterwards and try to understand things that they haven't understood in a face-to-face environment. I'm actually fairly convinced that COVID will have a long-lasting disruptive impact on the educational industry, and that we will not simply be able to get back to business as usual after this pandemic will be over, and if it's going to be over at some point in time, but that education of the future will look very different from what we were used to for the last century. And studying this and trying to determine which way we are going and what the potential in this situation could be, definitely sounds like an interesting topic to me.
I must say, Demian, that was fantastic. And thank you for bringing your colleagues on board. They were much kinder about you than we anticipated when they did the interviews. But it was really good getting their honest perspective of how they, as professors and administrators, are having to deal with the fact that the students they are teaching are needing a perspective different than that they used to actually put forward in the past. I thought that was brilliant.
Yeah, we've all really had to reconsider as of March and especially now, how have our disciplines, how has the industry evolved and how is it going to evolve? Because we want to be teaching these students so they can think about this industry 2, 3, 5 years down the road. So there's a lot of hypothesis testing, a lot of discussion going on. And, I applaud all my colleagues, not just the 5 that were on the show, but everybody else for all the work that everybody's putting into, not just from teaching online, which is a whole nother world, but about the content, about what we're talking about with students and really preparing them and not just saying, well, what applied before will still apply in the future. Some things will, as we can see, but some things will change drastically. What did something stick out for you in particular?
There were 3 things. I think firstly, I don't think students, I don't think parents, I don't think anyone are used to academics having to be entrepreneurial. And all of you, exactly as you say, the content has changed, the format of teaching has changed, everything changed quickly. So it was interesting seeing the agility of people that usually work within a very clear curriculum and program of work. I thought that was very interesting. Linked to that, the fact that innovation is driven very much by emergency, not necessarily by, is there an opportunity? Is there a desire? So much of what is happening in our industry, whether it's travel, tourism, hospitality, your favorite of aviation, is out of survival, not strategy. I always argue that when we use the term, when people will ask, oh, you've pivoted your business. No, my business responded to the need to change. And then we re-articulate it as pivoting. And I thought it was lovely how all of your colleagues are very sensitive to the fact that what they used to teach might not necessarily help students as much as the need to pivot some of what they are teaching to be more relevant. I thought that was interesting. But most importantly, I found that hospitality, travel, and tourism, we often focus on hard infrastructure, the hotels, the airlines, the airports, the cruises, and yet it's soft infrastructure that's actually going to be the critical resource in the future. And looking at it from the point of view of, as Nicole said, human economics, not just the economics of the industry itself, It's the industry of the travelers and the mindset of the travelers that needs to be understood over and above the economics of the industry. That I thought was very interesting and very honest.
Yeah, I think those are great points, and your insight into that is really interesting. And I absolutely agree about the issue of innovation and having to come out of necessity. We often say that strategy takes place constantly, but it really emerges when there's an absolute need for it, when you are in danger. When things are going well, we often will coast along a little bit and be tweaking, but really new strategies and new innovation absolutely comes around when it's absolutely necessary and there's no choice but to do it. And I think we're seeing that in the industry, and we're seeing that professors like my colleagues recognizing that this is impacting all disciplines. It's not just impacting the area of innovation, it's impacting strategy, it's impacting human resources, organizational behavior, development, even finance. And so I think that's a really good observation. And the issue of the human economics, and not just the hard infrastructure, but the human infrastructure. I like Elisa's point about the technology and the human side having to not just coexist, but really interplay much more and find new ways, not just to use technology, but for people and technology to work together to help firms and organizations and people through the crisis. So I thought that was really interesting. And similarly, Nicole brought up this idea of no longer thinking of strategies just at the firm level, but thinking of the network. And to me, that's the soft side as well, right? This is relationships between firms. We keep hearing in the hotel industry that we need to band together, not just to take on the virus or take on governments that are not supportive enough, but to be sharing best practices and really trying to help each other. And Sebastian Bazan from Accor said this a few weeks ago, saying the big chains with a lot of the power and money are going to have to help the independents to survive through this phase. And exactly what that's going to look like is up for debate. But again, networking between firms in industry and across industries. And I think that's also, we're going to see that across disciplines as well.
It's true. We used to talk about collaboration as entities one to another. Now it's everyone. I have a trick question for you, Demian.
Okay.
Because we asked all of your colleagues and they were lovely and obliging. And if you could go back and learn one more thing, what would it be?
So one of my colleagues mentioned it, but for me, behavioral economics, I think it's so interesting, so absolutely interesting that if I was 25 years old or doing my PhD again, I'd probably have gone to study that. But to come up with something additional,
You are Yoda, you know everything. So.
Yeah, no, I should have known that you would ask me this. I guess, yeah, the consumer behavioral economics, and if not sociology and psychology. I think that I focused a lot on strategy, and my research was always about the way we strategize, strategy as a practice. How do we actually day to day use the tools and techniques that we teach in schools to strategize? And I think if I'd had a little bit more of a psychology background or even an anthropology background, I would have been able to bring something a little bit different to this field of study. So I probably have done that, but still the behavioral economics would have been number one for sure. Just so interesting.
Yet I would argue for a stuffy professor, we've seen through RISE, all of us have seen through RISE for over 210 days, a different side of you. And it's been really lovely because, no, not the right side, the left side. Okay. It's been interesting from the point of view of, indeed, you're a professor, you have that audience, and yet you've allowed your own EQ, who knew, to come to the stage and be able to help people through this time, not just with the intelligence, but with the instinct. So that's been special. And it shows how a good professor knows the audience and respects them to understand how to get the message through. I thought that was really special. So as they say, necessity is the mother of invention. The grouch is the father of rise. So we are all very blessed and we thank you for that. And thank you for bringing your colleagues to the stage. That was really special.
Yeah, I want to just thank them, and I've done it before, and all my colleagues really for all the hard work and for the support of RISE and for being, innovative in what they're doing. I think it's going to be really interesting to see not just what happens in each of the disciplines at the university level, but what's actually going to change in marketing or in organizational behavior or in strategy in the industry, and see if we were right or wrong, and see how we can, at the HL, we really work closely with the industry. So it'll be, I think, fascinating to see how this evolves.
Indeed. And speaking of evolving, we talk about our next Rise Live, which is going to be on November 23rd. And we're going to be talking about a subject matter, again, that so many of our viewers had said, tell me what's going on. It's events, and it's major events such as World Travel Market that just took place here in London a few days ago and had to go combination, virtual as well as hybrid. Some people in London, some people halfway across the world dialing in. So we have a really good program that's going to be titled, We'll Get There Eventually. We'll talk about the event industry. Gotta say, it was one of our Wizards of Oz. Grace came up with that great title, and we went ahead with it because Jessica said so. So we look forward to having everyone join us on November 23rd. Please do. We're going to make an event of it. We look forward to having you there. Until then, as always, thank you for joining us on Rise in Practice. Stay home, stay safe, stay hopeful, stay strong, keep your hands clean. And Professor Hodari, over to you for the close, sir.
Yeah, and to my students and students everywhere and people in the industry that are constantly wanting to learning, keep reading, keep studying, and keep watching Rise. See you next week.
Take care, everyone. See you on the 23rd.